Hi there, it's Geoff here with another topic video. This time let's spend a few minutes together thinking about the important idea of a natural monopoly. So a natural monopoly is a market structure, a special market structure where one firm can produce and supply a particular service or product at a lower unit cost than multiple firms could. In other words, from a natural monopoly point of view, the productively efficient output is to have one firm supplying it because of economies of scale. Those internal scale economies are so pronounced that the unit cost of production carries on falling as the scale of output increases. So a natural monopoly hints that there's only really room for one firm in the industry to fully reach the minimum efficient scale. And in theory, that gives the potential for monopoly power, monopoly abuse. So in many countries with natural monopolies, they are state-owned and heavily regulated to ensure fair pricing, which we'll look at the diagram in a few minutes, quality of service, affordability, accessibility for households to help maintain consumer welfare. Now, there's a big debate in economics about what industries, which markets meet some of the criteria for natural monopolies. So in the digital economy, for example, web search, there are many competing web search businesses, but the sheer scale, for example, of Google as a web search infrastructure has aspects of or elements of a natural monopoly to it. And likewise, who knows what platform you're using to watch this video, but messaging platforms such as WhatsApp and Instagram and so on and so forth, they have strong hints of natural monopolies. Indeed, many digital firms are built around the idea of scale. And in particular, if they can scale but very quickly, they can bring down the unit cost per user and hence become more profitable. Air traffic control. You wouldn't want two sets of air traffic control as you land at an airport, for example. London Underground probably has big aspects of a natural monopoly. Again, you don't want wasteful duplication. The network of rail infrastructure, the stations, the signalling systems, the safety systems, is probably a natural monopoly. And aspects of things like water and sewage and energy grids, all of these, if you think about it, that there are huge fixed costs of building, improving and maintaining networks. And you don't want two sets of energy pipes and electricity systems going into each property. The grid itself is probably a natural monopoly. So a natural monopoly occurs when the most efficient number of firms in the industry is one. There's room for one firm to fully exploit the scale economies. Typically, they are industries with very high fixed costs and low marginal costs. The marginal cost is the cost of supplying to the next household, the next business. So it may be inefficient to have many firms each producing the same output. And here's the diagram. So with a natural monopoly, the long run average cost carries on falling. There you can see it. Now keep in mind, of course, that long run average cost is the result of a series of short run costs as we move from small to medium to very, very large scale production. So what you can see here is that the average cost carries on falling as output increases. There are big increasing returns to scale. So if you get a question on a natural monopoly, this is the unit cost curve you need to draw. It's a downward sloping long run average cost. And it means that it's often very tough, almost impossible on grounds of cost for smaller, if you like, challenger businesses to enter a market. So economies of scale act as a barrier to entry. But, and it's a big but, it might well be possible for smaller firms, challenger firms, new entrants to successfully enter the market at retail level. What I mean by that is they're providing the final mile service to the customer. I'll give you a couple of examples of that in a few minutes. So it might be the case, for example, that you have Network Rail managing the network system in the UK, but you have competition between train operating companies who win the franchises to operate services at local level. So in terms of examples of natural monopolies, again, there's a debate about this, but probably the electricity and gas distribution network itself is a natural monopoly, as distinct from retail distribution. So OVO Energy or Octopus are energy providers. They don't generate the energy, but they buy energy in the wholesale market and operate as an energy retailer. Network Rail operates the UK rail industry, Whereas LNER, which is state-owned by the way, and TransPennine, they operate train services, the final mile service to the customer. So if you get a question on natural monopoly, important to distinguish between the grid or the network itself and the final mile service. In terms of analysis, there's our long and average cost curve falling. I've assumed the marginal cost of supplying to this industry is low and constant. And of course, one reason why the average cost keeps falling is because you've got very high fixed costs but low marginal costs. I'm assuming here the firm is maximising profits, where marginal cost meets marginal revenue, output Q1, and in the absence of regulation, in the absence of price capping, for example, this monopoly could charge price P1 with a unit cost of C1. And that, of course, allows them to make big supernormal profits. So with a natural monopoly, high fixed costs, marginal cost lower than average cost. You probably want one firm to be the provider, the network provider, to achieve those scale economies. Of course, in theory, they could charge a monopoly price. It doesn't have to be the case. It could be a state-owned natural monopoly, in which case they could attempt to price at marginal cost, where average revenue here meets low and marginal cost at a much higher output. But you can see if they price at marginal cost, they're going to make a loss because the price per unit P2 is lower than the cost per unit, and they make a loss. So in this situation with a natural monopoly, pricing at marginal cost would inflict a loss. Well, somebody would have to pay for that, the taxpayer, for example, if you did that with a state-owned industry. So it's important to understand the nature of cost for a natural monopoly. There could be big scale economies, which in theory is good for the consumer if reflected in lower prices. But there's a whole issue about how you should regulate or who should own and run these natural monopolies. Should it be state-owned? Should the water industry, for example, be state-owned? That's a very topical debate in economics. That involves value judgments. And I won't tell you what I cover on this, but there's a big topical debate about whether key utilities, such as water and sewage, such as the rail network and rail services, such as energy providers, should they be private or state-run? So there we go. Thanks for joining in this topic video on natural monopolies. Take care, stay safe, stay positive, stay curious, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.